Have you ever been confused about how CSS works, especially when using multiple classes? It can be tricky, right? If that's you, then you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into how CSS handles multiple classes with the same property. I totally get it. It can be frustrating when you're trying to style an element and you're not sure which class takes precedence. You're not alone in this confusion. Many people face the same issue when learning CSS. Let's look at a specific question from a user. When I apply multiple classes to an HTML tag, which width property is actually used? They provided an example with 3 classes, each defining a width. Sound familiar? Let's break it down together. So what happens when you have multiple classes with the same property? CSS follows a set of rules called specificity to determine which style gets applied. The last defined rule usually takes precedence, but there are exceptions. Let's explore this further. And stick around. At the end, I'll share a quick tip on how to manage your CSS classes effectively to avoid confusion. To understand which width property is applied when multiple classes are used, we need to consider the concept of CSS specificity. The user should know that when multiple classes are applied to an element, the last defined class in the CSS will take precedence if they have the same specificity. In this example, the user has 3 classes: main, rule 1, and rule 2. The width properties are defined as 600 pixels, 400 pixels, and 300 pixels respectively. Since main is defined first, it will not override the others unless it has higher specificity. When the user applies the classes main, rule 1, and rule 2 to the same HTML element, the width property that will be applied is from rule 2, which is 300 pixels. This is because it is the last class defined in the HTML. To summarize, when multiple classes with the same property are applied, the last class defined in the HTML will determine the final style. In this case, the width of the element will be 300 pixels. Fun fact, did you know that CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets? The cascading part is key because it explains how styles are applied in order of priority. Now let's look at the answers provided by other users. This user explains that when multiple classes are applied to an HTML tag, the last defined class will determine the CSS property value. In this case, the width from rule 2, which is 300 pixels, will be used because it appears last in the code. Let's take a look at an answer from another user. This user explains that CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. This means that when multiple classes are applied to an element, all rules are considered, but if there are identical properties, the last one defined takes precedence. In your example, the width property from rule 2, which is 300 pixels, will be applied, overriding the width from rule 1. That's the end of that answer. Let's see another perspective. This user explains that when multiple classes are applied to an HTML element, the last defined rule takes precedence for properties like width. However, if there's an inline style, that will override any class rules. They also mention that specificity plays a role in determining which styles apply. Specificity is calculated based on the type of selectors used, with inline styles having the highest priority. Let's take a look at another answer from another user. One alternative solution is to use the important rule in your CSS. By adding important to the width property in the rule 1 class, you can ensure that this width is applied, overriding any other conflicting styles. Let's take a look at another answer from another user. This user explains that when multiple classes have the same CSS property, the last defined property will overwrite the previous ones. For example, if you have width set in multiple classes, the width from the last class applied will take effect. They also note that properties like borders will not be overwritten unless explicitly defined in the later classes. To simplify, they suggest combining all properties into one CSS rule. Here's a quick tip. To avoid confusion, try to keep your CSS classes organized and use comments to clarify which styles are applied where. This will save you a lot of headaches in the future. And there you have it. Now you know how CSS handles multiple classes with the same property. Remember, understanding specificity is key. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button for more tips and don't miss our next video on advanced CSS techniques.